Hi, thanks for being here. Today I'm going to talk about dyslexia and dysgraphia. A lot of people like to say that these are brain disorders, neurodiversity, blah, 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 blah. And I say blah, 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 blah because all of those things annoy me. When you really take a look, I, as a learning and development theorist, and also someone with decades of experience in helping children set a solid foundation in early reading and also overcome some of the damages that have been done to them by poor instruction, I can tell you that this is not the case. When you look at someone with dyslexia or dysgraphia, what you're looking at is someone who's been taught incorrectly. And I know a lot of you are probably shaking your head going, what? What? Everybody's talking about how this is a problem, a learning disorder. Well, it's more of a teaching disorder, if you ask me. And there's plenty of evidence to support my position. So today I'm going to explain to you some of the things that I've seen in the past and how I have helped some of these children overcome these things by giving you a few different stories of actual cases. The first case I want to talk about happened way long time ago. It was probably around 2000, 2001. This was before I even earned my associate's degree. I had already been teaching children how to read with good effect. We were in this group setting, and I was helping children, very young children, they're about 5 years old, to write Mother's Day cards for Mother's Day. So this little boy in particular had written every single letter backwards on the front of his card that could be written backwards. So the front of the card just said Happy Mother's Day, and everything was backwards that could be written backwards. Now, obviously, the capital H couldn't be, so that was correct. But all of his P's, his Y, everything was backwards all the way through Happy Mother's Day. I just couldn't believe it. So what did I do? Did I go, oh no, this poor child has some kind of disorder. I'm going to have to, wonder who I should tell. That is not what I did. Thank God for this child and for myself. What I did do was I walked up to this little boy and I said, oh my gosh, that is so amazing. And he said, what? And I said, your card. I said, did you know that you wrote every single letter backwards? I said, that is an amazing trick. I said, but guess what? Your mom is not going to be able to read it if they're all backwards unless she has a mirror. And he goes, oh, she has a mirror because kids are smart. And I'm like, oh, but does she carry that mirror everywhere with her? And he's like, no, but we have mirrors in the house too. We have mirrors in the car. And I'm like, wow, that's true. I said, but what if you're in a place where there are no mirrors? And at that age, you have to reason with them in this way to get them to understand why they should fix what they've just done. So I walked him over to a mirror and I let him see how all of the letters switched around if we were reading it in a mirror. And I said, but remember, your mom might not have a mirror, so you're going to have to write them the correct way. So he goes, okay. So he went back, and without any further instruction, now think about that. No further instruction by me to teach him how to fix those letters. That child rewrote that card and did it 100% accurately. Every single letter was written in the correct direction. Think about that. If there was some sort of a brain issue, how would he have made those corrections? So then you start to say, what is it that's going on here with these children? Well, what I've noticed over decades of working with kids, and I mean a lot of decades, I'm getting some gray in my hair here, some bags under my eyes, some wrinkles, decades of working with children. And having a lot of student successes. My students are typically academically sound when I'm finished with them. If the parents do what I ask them to do and the students put in the work, etc., they're typically able to remediate and or set a good foundation. So what have I noticed? I've noticed that most little kids will write letters backwards. Say, what is going on? Why would that happen? nobody maybe taught them that there's a direction that they need to pay attention to. Some of the letters are mirror images of themselves. So for example, the small letter B and the small letter D, a lot of children get those mixed up. That's not technically a problem at first. That's just something you have to point out and they have to start paying attention to. Details matter. And the children that become more successful learn with a foundation that is set well for them. You see, I use my own structural process to help them structure the insides of their minds to interact with text appropriately. And when you do that, they excel. It's just how it goes because they've been set up properly. The teaching mechanisms that are being used are accurate, and they're setting the child up for success. So that's just one story. I have others. I have many, many others, but I'm going to tell you another one. So a few years back, I was hired in on a temporary certification through the state of California because even though I have a master's in general psych with a 4.0 GPA, I have to go back to college if I want to get certification to learn how to do it wrong in the state of California to teach children how to read. So anyways, I get in and I'm designing and running the entire program for intervention for this elementary school. Okay, and this was a TK through 4. And I was working with primarily the 1st through 4th graders for the year. In every single one of my classes, my students' growth averages, on average, say that 5 times fast, actually exceeded that of the classroom teachers for the previously higher performing students. So think about that. The group of students I was working with in each classroom were deemed to be the lowest performing and in need of the most help, but they were making the fastest gains. And I only worked with these children between half an hour to an hour and a half a week, okay? Half an hour to an hour and a half per week. The teachers had the kids all week long. So how did I get these results? You have to understand what you're doing. You have to understand how a person is being set up to interact with text. And when you see certain things, you could say, it looks to me like you were set up in this faulty way. Let's make those corrections and see how you do. And it turns out when you do that, the kids start to excel. So I had a number of kids that actually went above and beyond, some that caught up to grade level and some that actually went above grade level, which was absolutely flooring. It was amazing to watch. I did learn a lot working with some of these children, and I identified some commonalities in this school that were problematic in terms of the way the children were being taught. So that was really, really interesting too. This next story I'm going to tell you is a story about one of the students I was working with in this school. This little girl, she was in 1st grade, and she was a little bit frisky or devilish. I don't know what you want to say. She had a good personality. She did not like to sit still, and she basically hadn't been taught to focus very well. Now you might say, oh, ADHD. And I would say she had not been taught to focus well. Okay? Maybe we'll do another video on ADHD later. However, for this dyslexia / dysgraphia video, we're going to stick with the fact that she hadn't been taught to do this. And this was impacting her ability to read. So she gets into my classroom, and my classrooms are fun, but we are very, very, very serious about work. So you have got to pay attention, you have got to do your work, and then we can have our open fun with that. What she liked to do was she liked to write her name backwards, and I mean from right to left. It was really, really interesting because I would tell the kids, I would say, write your name in the upper right-hand corner of your paper. And so she would start at the very end and she would go backwards with every single letter. And sometimes the letters themselves were flipped backwards as well. So anybody who looked at this would say, oh my gosh, dyslexia, she's got some kind of a learning disorder, she's got a brain issue. No, she didn't. Okay, what ended up happening was she was trying to be she was trying to listen to my instruction and write her name in that area, but if you start over there on the right, there's no more room to write your name, right? So she just wrote it backwards. Now think about this. Children who are still learning to interact with text do not have a set understanding that the text has to be a specific direction from left to right every single time. Unless you explicitly tell them, they're not necessarily going to know this. So I looked at her paper and I thought, oh my gosh, what is she doing, right? I was like, uh-oh. And she goes, what? And I go, you wrote your name all the way backwards. You wrote it from right to left. It's supposed to go the other way. I said, I'm going to have to call you this name. And I read it backwards just to goof around and mess with her. And she goes, that's not my name. And she starts laughing. And I go, but I don't have to call you that because that's what you wrote down. And so we were having fun laughing about this. And she's like, but you can't call me that. That's not my name. I said, then you better fix your name because that's what I'm going to call you. And she's like, oh no. So she erased her name. And she started to write a little bit over, but she didn't leave enough room. So she had to erase it again, and she had to go back and rewrite it. So then we had to fix some of the letters that were backwards as well, because she did have issues with the letters being backwards themselves. But she was able to make these corrections without me explicitly explaining to her how to rewrite this. I did need to tell her you have to leave enough room. I did have to goof around with her and show her that when she wrote her name backwards like that, it became something else as a word because we read from left to right in English. Now, if this was a brain disorder or something, why would children in America reading right to left be a problem, but maybe not children learning a language where they do read right to left being a problem, right? Because not all languages are read from left to right. So how could this be a brain disorder? You're saying things backwards, but it's not technically backwards unless we create rules where it is backwards. And we do have those rules, okay? But maybe somebody just hasn't taught the child well enough so that the child understands this fully. I had students that didn't know the difference between a name of a letter or the sound of a letter. So if I'd ask for the name, sometimes for the letter B, for example, they'd go buh. And I'm like, well, that's the sound. What's the name? And they're like buh. And then they'd go B. So they were just guessing, did I want the name or the sound? They didn't necessarily understand that when I was asking for name, I was asking for B. If I was asking for sound, I was asking for buh. So I had to sit down some of these children in a group and I said, okay, so we're going to learn something today. I have a name, you have a name, these letters have names. My name is Miss Holly. What's your name? And they would tell me, and I'd go, what's your name? And they'd tell me, and I go, what's this letter's name? B. Now it also makes a sound. Can we make sounds? I just said my name. This letter says B. That's the sound it makes. And one of the little girls in one of the groups that I did this in said, oh, I get it now. Out of my seat. These kids are so funny. But when you're an adult and you're teaching them, you don't always think about these things. You have to pay attention to these details. And you have to set up the learning environment in a way that actually works, not one that you assume should work. You don't blame a child for not being able to understand when the teaching methods are faulty. And that is why when someone says to me, my child has been diagnosed with dyslexia, he or she is 6 years old. I had a first grader that was 6 years old that had already been diagnosed. I say, okay, I think about what is it that somebody else has seen? And then I think about why did this happen to this child? So I have one more example of a first grader many, many years ago that I worked with. He had been diagnosed with dyslexia. He was 6 years old. When he came to me, he could not read. 4 weeks into instruction, I was the first grade teacher at the time. 4 weeks into instruction, this child read his first word with special rules. It had an E at the end. So I think it was the word give or gave or something like that. I don't remember specifically the word, but it was something like that. It had a letter E at the end. He sat there at the edge of my desk, hugged himself, and rocked back and forth, looking up at me with his cute little eyes, just hugging himself and this huge smile on his face. Like he couldn't believe that he had read his first word. He was hugging himself. And it was just amazing to see the pride that developed in this child when he was able to read on his own. So when you're dealing with a child that has, quote unquote, a learning disorder, I strongly recommend that you find someone who knows what they're doing to help you. You can contact me. I do offer an early reading program, and I can walk you through the steps that you need to do with your child, as well as work with your child myself, even online, with you present, so that you know what we need to work on, and you can kind of take my lead from that if you'd like me to help out. But even if it's not me, find someone that actually knows what they're doing, not someone that's guessing and not someone that tells you they know what they're doing. So how do you find someone like that? How do you tell? Because so many people say, I'm great at this. The results speak for themselves. If a child is memorizing words and cannot sound them out for you consistently, that's a problem. If a child cannot write their letters the right way, that's a problem. Okay? Whomever is teaching that child is not doing it properly. And that I'll go on the record saying, in fact, I am now, right? And I've said it a zillion times before. Learning issues, particularly as they develop in younger children, are typically teaching issues. And that's a fact.